Hi everybody, it's Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by composer Toby Chu. Toby's musical career started back in 2001 when he was given the chance to work at Remote Control Productions, back then called Media Ventures. During his early days, Toby would write additional music or work as a music programmer and arranger on films like Spy Game, Shrek, The Kingdom of Heaven, Phone Booth, Bad Boys 2, Team America World Police, Tron Legacy, X-Men Origins Wolverine, and many more. Soon after that, he was given the chance to break out on his own, writing music for several TV movies and series as well, such as Solace, Last Exit, Burn Notice, Covert Affairs, The Beyond, and most recently the short film Bao, produced by Disney Pixar. Welcome, Toby.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Great to have you. Toby, at first I would like to know more about your musical background and how you got involved with Media Ventures or Remote Control Productions.
Sure. Well, I actually started out. I didn't really come from a musical family. There was more kind of visual arts, fine arts in my family growing up. So everybody in my family drew. My dad was very into Chinese calligraphy. I remember being really small and bringing him to like show and tell, and he would do calligraphy, Chinese calligraphy, and then after around that time as well, my brother and I were always drawing and painting, and I kind of always thought, when you grow up, you're so little like that, you kind of think whatever you do, everybody does, and we were just painting and drawing constantly, more than I think my friends were doing, because it wasn't until like much later when one day I found this box of ribbons at home, and I asked my mom. I said, "What is this?" And she's like, "Oh, these are from all the art competitions that you did." And I remember being a little kid and we would go somewhere. My brother and I would paint or draw, and then we'd get a ribbon. So we were constantly doing that, and eventually going to an art school, and I was actually very seriously considering going to college for painting and drawing. But eventually music kind of took over, and music was always in my life. I did start around 7 years old playing guitar and piano, and I always went to these summer schools and summer music camps, and I was in like jazz band in school, and music was always in the background, but it was more kind of a background thing to fine arts than it was the main focus, and eventually it just became my focus. I think it had to do with the fact that it was always in my family, and when I went to high school, and my high school was an art school, and a lot of the students who would graduate there would go on to go to college with full scholarships for painting and drawing. My brother, 3 years older than me, I remember by the time I got to high school, he was very well known as an artist in my school, even to the point where I remember going to my high school for the first time, and there were literally like flags made out of canvas that said "Chu is God" on them all around the school, and I'm like, oh my God, because my brother, he was really, he was obviously very, very good, and he was, just well known in the school. And in the school that I went to was kind of, you were kind of cool if your jeans were covered in paint. They'd be like, oh, that's a real painter over there who's covered in paint. But yeah, so they'd have these huge art festivals, and people would come all over the East Coast at the art festival. And if you were one of the top painters there, they would give you one of the top spots. So you would go in, and your paintings would be right there. And so, anyways, I guess I always had that pressure of following in those footsteps. And even the teacher there, even was trying to recruit me when I was in, much earlier before high school. I would go and paint with him over part of the summer when I would get back from music camp. And yeah, so, we were very dedicated. What I mean by dedication is, you have to imagine, you're 12, 13, 14, and we were painting in, rainstorms, If it was raining, we'd be excited to go paint in the rain. We would be doing paintings that were so large that they wouldn't even fit in the house. So we would have a ladder to get to the top of the paintings, and we'd be painting in, oils and oil paints and watercolor and Conte and charcoal, and I was always a mess, covered in something. So it was very in our family, and so I think when I got to it was kind of around junior high school is when I started thinking, you know what, I want to do something different. I don't want to go into art. I want to, and music wasn't really in my family, so it was really enticing for me. So got really, really, I started focusing on music. I mean, it wasn't like I just started then. I was always doing it. I was always interested. It just became more and more of a focus, and I started getting incredibly serious about it. And, and as soon as I started thinking, oh my gosh, maybe I should, I want to do this for a living, I kind of, started to, really notice my peers. And, you go to, I used to go up to Boston every summer to Berkeley for music camp. And, there would be these phenomenal musicians there all the time. And so I realized, if I was really going to do this, I had to really, put in the time and focus. And so, really got serious, started, practicing and studying composition and music, 9-10 hours a day. And then, eventually went to music school. So I went to University of Miami, and I wasn't in the music school yet, but I figured, you know what, I'm just going to go there and audition. And I went there, and I played a lot of classical when I started. Classical guitar was the main focus, and then it became jazz. And I listened to a lot of jazz. My dad listened to a lot of jazz. It was either Nat King Cole records or Sinatra records playing in my house, or Chinese opera.
Great.
And so I was really into jazz. I went over there and I auditioned with the head of the music department over there, and very intimidating, scary guy. And I remember auditioning for him, and afterwards he kind of paused and he was like, so what other things do you like to do besides music? And I said, well, I used to paint, and draw for most of my life. And he's like, well, I think you should do that. And I was like, oh, okay. He was very, strict. And he was kind of like, well, we can't accept you into the music department. And I was like crushed, but at the same time I was motivated. I said, oh, I'm going to show you, And so I just really practiced and really worked hard, did a lot of studying, performing with a lot of people. And eventually I mustered up enough confidence to go back and audition again with the same guy. And afterwards he kind of paused, and he kind of said, obviously there's been some improvement here, but I'll accept you to the program, but you'll be on a probation status, which basically means you have to audition with a jury every week on Fridays.
God.
I'd had to pay for all the chairs of the department, and depending on that audition, it would be whether you can stay in the school or not. So he said you can take certain music classes, but you can't take all of them, and it's until you're accepted as a full-time music student. So I was like, okay, that's a step forward. And I was there for 2 years in Miami, and they had a very good jazz program, and they had maybe just like 8 guitarists they would accept, and they were all phenomenal. And I was happy to be in a probational status. So I don't remember any of the other classes I took there. I knew I had to take other academic classes, but I think I skipped them all. I was just always in a practice room, or I was singing in the choir, or I was just trying to, get exposed to as much as I could. I always felt like I needed to catch up to everybody else who's been doing music their whole lives. and then I had these auditions every Friday, and they were quite intense. Yeah, it was it was either I was going to stay and do what I love to do, or I was going to be kicked out. So I would spend every waking hour preparing for these auditions, and I kept doing it for every Friday, and I was taking music classes there, but they kept telling me, well, you can't take this class, blah blah blah. So you're kind of like, oh, and for me, it was a motivational thing. It made me want to work harder. And one day, I remember I was talking to another guy, a guitarist over there who I really looked up to, and he was really amazing. And one day we were playing, and then we kind of got to know each other. And I said to him one night, I said, just admitting to you, I'm not even in the school. I'm in probation. I've been on probation for like a year or something. He laughed, and he was like, man, we're all on probation.
Really?
He's like, we all have to do that. We all have to audition every week. And I was like, what?
Crazy.
And it was crazy. It was just like, I mean, that's what he told me. And I was just like sweating bullets all the time, trying to like keep up with everybody. And but it was great. It was a great lesson, great education. And eventually, the teachers like really warmed up to me, and the second year I was taking more and more classes, and it was entirely my focus. And then there was, like I said before, I used to go to these camps every summer at Berkeley up in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
I knew Boston very well. I knew Berkeley very well. I knew a lot of the faculty from going there every summer. And there was one teacher who was up there who taught at New England Conservatory who I really admired, and he only would teach maybe 3 students a year. He was very coveted, and he would only accept 3 students. And I was constantly trying to be able to study with him, and I found out that I could study with him. And just when I found that out, I was like, okay, I'm moving to Boston to study with this guy. And so I moved to Boston. I went to Berkeley up there, and I studied with him privately. And the more I studied with him, he was a guitarist, but he was more than a guitarist. He was, what he was doing was so different from any other player. It wasn't just jazz; it was everything. It wasn't just jazz or classical. He was really innovating music on the guitar and doing all these kind of unique things. And he'd have me do all these really bizarre musical things of, I mean, I don't want to get too technical, but they're really strange stuff where he'd be like, okay, you have to listen to a metronome, that click that musicians practice with. He's like, you have to listen to that all day. So you have to have it in like one ear in a headphone, and you walk around and do your dishes to the metronome and walk. He'd do all these like really bizarre things, but they were really interesting. And eventually, the more I was doing it, the more it was kind of, I realized, maybe I should really focus in composing, because ever since I started music, and even composing in painting, it's very, very similar in terms of composition on what you're painting or drawing, layers, and all those different kind of techniques were very, very interesting to me. And I remember a lot of times when I was playing in jazz trios and quartets and big band, I'd always sometimes get frustrated at what other players were doing. I think it was just the control freak in me, and I would want to go home and like write something different from them to play. So it was always kind of that compositional side was always in me. And I think after going to school up there, I realized, I think I'd be pretty good at this. It's always been in me. And so I took a lot of composition lessons, and I got to study also with one of the first cellists in the Boston Symphony, and named Ron Feldman, and he was the youngest cellist accepted to the Boston Symphony. I think he was accepted when he was like 12 or something to the Boston Symphony or something crazy. I can't remember.
Great.
This prodigy, and so I got to study with him, and he would take me to closed rehearsals of the Boston Symphony. So I got to see Seiji Ozawa conduct, just with the orchestra. Everyone's in there, wearing jeans and relaxed and, rehearsing. And I got to see them, working on Madame Butterfly and, Stravinsky and so many different, things. And it was just me and the teacher and the orchestra and the conductor, and at Symphony Hall, and which was amazing because you get to see them, what they're working on, how they work things out, and so I learned a lot through that. And being at Berkeley was great, but I feel like some of the best education I got there was just on my own. I would go to the New England Conservatory Library and I would listen to music and study scores, and I was just very, very hungry and thirsty to learn. I think I always felt like I need to catch up to everybody, so I have to work harder than everyone else is willing to work. So I would be doing classes, then practicing, and then going to New England Conservatory, to the library, going to concerts. Just really saturated my whole life, almost every waking hour, studying music. And eventually, after graduating, I moved to Los Angeles and got an internship at Media Ventures, which is Remote Control now.
Yeah.
And which was really interesting. That was very exciting. All of a sudden, I was 20 or 21 years old, and I was all of a sudden thrown into, I think Hans was working on Gladiator, Mission Impossible 2, and you see Tom Cruise waltzing down the hallway, and I'm in my 20s. It was very exciting to see all that happening. And so that was really great. And then, I worked very, very hard there, and I think they liked me. And the studio manager, very quickly, I think I was just an intern for maybe just a month or two, and then they promoted me to like an engineer. And I didn't know anything about computers, by the way. I was really just soaking it in and trying, I was there all night long, and they would tell me like, Toby, you should go home. And I didn't really want to go. And I was like, where am I going to go? Like you're 20, and, I was basically broke. I think I had like $800 in my name, and from selling paintings, mind you. I took all the money I sold paintings with.
Wow.
Throughout there. So I was, I got to sit there and, on the back couch and watch Hans work, and I would just be there all the time. And then I remember one night I met, I was helping all the composers that were there. I'm trying to think how many composers there were there at the time. There weren't that many. I would say maybe there were 5 or 6. And I was helping everybody. I was supposed to just help Hans in the studio.
Yeah.
But everybody, when there's a good intern, everybody's like, grab him, And so I was, driving like 100 miles a day, grabbing things, and then coming back and getting to sit and watch people work, which was wonderful. And everybody was very lovely to me. And so one day I met Harry, and Harry Harry Gregson-Williams, and he pulled me in, was kind of like, hey, Tobes, do you have a second? Maybe you can help me out with a little something. I said, of course. And I think he just finished, I can't remember what movie that was, but he had this whole back room full of CDs, and that he just finished a film. And, this is back in the, this is the back in the day when we had CDs, and you needed to put these like stickers on them and like put all these, jewel cases and stuff. And he's like, if you could just like put on some stickers until you get tired, and I'd really appreciate it. And I said, of course. And I went to the back room, and, the whole room is like full of CDs. I was like, and I just did them all. And I think I finished like at 3 a.m.
Wow.
And my hands were shaking. Because I didn't know there was something called a CD stomper, which you could like, it would help you stick the stickers on, but I didn't have one of those. So I was like by hand putting stickers on, and I don't know how many CDs I did. I did like hundreds, and it wasn't because like Harry never told me to do that. I was like that hungry, I was just it wasn't like and I didn't have the mentality of like I got to do this to get a job. It was more like I just really wanted to help and be useful. So I was just doing things. I was just so excited about what everybody was doing. I thought everybody was doing the coolest thing ever, writing music for films, and it was so interesting. So I was, I did that, and then I think maybe the next day or something, Harry came. I kind of bumped into him, and he said, I'm assuming, Toby, you didn't get a degree in coffee making. And I said, no, No, I went to school. I studied music, and he was like, "Oh, okay, great." And then I don't know. It's all a blur, but this was 2000, April 2000,
Yeah.
and then one day, he kind of I think he was working on Chicken Run for Aardman,
Yeah.
and yeah, and he was I think he played something on the piano, and he recorded it like on a little tape cassette or something. And I was walking the hall and he handed it to me and he's like, "Hey, Tobes, I'm just going to run and grab some food. If you could write this out for me, I really appreciate it." And I was like, "Oh my God, the first musical task, someone's giving me a musical task to do." And so I wanted to use the piano in his room, but he had an assistant at the time. Steve Jablonski was his assistant.
Yeah.
And Steve was working in the room, so I couldn't use the piano. So I just like ran to like a little closet and I didn't have a piano or anything. I was like, well, I just started, transcribing it, and they had like I think it was a little DAT player or something, and I just transcribed it by ear, and hopefully my ear training lessons after all those years pay off. And then Steve was like, "Oh, I'm done with the room. You can go in." And so I wanted to try it on the piano, and just then like Harry comes in and he's like, "Oh, thanks," and he played it, and thank goodness it was correct. And then he offered me a job to
Wow.
work there, and I was like, "Of course." So that's kind of how I started with Harry. And Steve was there for a bit longer with me. We were kind of working together for a little bit until he moved on to work kind of for Hans. And but it was amazing, being there and not just learning from Harry, but also just learning from everybody that was over there. There
Yeah,
was always
sure.
something going on. There was always someone working on something. They were trying some new technology. There were always sessions happening. So sometimes I remember like Anthony Hopkins came to play some piano on Hannibal, and they wanted to use
Wow.
Harry's piano, so I got to be with Anthony Hopkins for a bit and set up the piano, and it was kind of amazing. You're like in your early 20s and you're around all this stuff. So making a long story short, I stayed with Harry for over, I think it was like 12 years until I finally moved away from Harry. And I got to work on, I think, over 50 films with Harry, and it was
Yeah.
just,
We did a
yeah,
lot with him. I think Spy Game must have been one of your first assignments, right?
it was actually the first film I was on like by myself as Harry's assistant was Shrek. And then I think Spy Game was right after Shrek, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
I think so. Um, so yeah, so that was the beginning. I could talk for days about it.
I
It
bet.
just a long journey, but it was amazing, and I learned so much from Harry, and I learned everything about how to get a film done, with him, and every time you work on a movie, you come across some issues or some challenge, whether it's musical or technical or political, and you just kind of learn the ropes. I think it's really invaluable for whenever I get asked the question of a young composer who wants to start out, I always say, you really should just try to work for another composer, a busy composer, because you're just going to learn so much. And when you're on it's not impossible to do on your own, but it's way harder.
Yeah.
So, why not? Why not go work for someone and make all your mistakes behind the radar? Really, really work it out. And then finally, when it's your turn to go write something and be in the limelight, I guess, or at least be responsible visually for everything, that you've made all these mistakes, behind the radar, and when it was okay to make mistakes, and be more prepared.
Great. If I'm not mistaken, you also worked on Team America World Police, right?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
had I have spoken to Harry a couple of times, but we never got around to talk about Team America World Police for some reason.
It was a pretty crazy project, that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that the whole score had to be written and recorded within 10 days. Is that a fact?
Yeah. That's absolutely correct. Yeah.
Wow.
I think it might have been 8 days, actually.
Really?
Yeah, it was absolutely, because it was a rescore.
Yeah.
And I remember Harry telling me about it. He said that about to start something new, and I said, "What is it?" And he said, "It's called Team America." And I was like, "I'm pretty sure I saw that poster in the movie theater, and it's coming out soon." And yeah, it was a rescore. So we got the picture. I think either the day of or the day. I think we got the picture on the day of the final dub when the dub started. We got the picture for the first time. It was completely crazy, like how quickly it went by. Um, and it was a lot of music. It was like over 100 minutes or more of music.
That basically
And
that basically meant working around the clock, huh?
yeah, it was absolutely working around the clock. I remember falling asleep while I was working,
Oh God.
writing, and I would, you would work, and you're at bar 50 and you're working, and then you wake up and it's like bar 2000 because the computer's still playing, And oh my God, and go back. And but it was very fast, and I remember, I was working on a cue on that movie, and Harry came in the room and he said, "Oh, Matt and Trey are coming, the creators of South Park and and Team America." And they said, "I might bring them by to your room." And I said, "Okay." So I was just starting the queue, and I was like working as quickly as possible, and I think it was so quick. It was maybe like in 30 minutes or so. Harry came in the room with Matt and Trey, and he was like, "Okay, play the cue." And I just played the cue, and they liked it, and I was like, "Great!" And they were really happy, and they were very lovely, and they were very, I think, appreciative of Harry coming in and doing this movie so quickly and so well.
Amazing. The score is really good. I mean, it's
Oh,
it's
yeah.
it's a miracle you guys pulled it off so quickly. I mean,
It was a miracle. It was a miracle, but Harry is a great leader. You
yeah,
know, he's very involved in everything, in every aspect of everything, every piece of music that gets written, every little thing that he does. He's very involved, very focused, and obviously has a tremendous amount of experience on how to get this kind of stuff done and done well.
yeah,
So there was definitely that was very important, because when there's one thing, sitting there and writing music, um, having a glass of wine, looking out the window, and taking a walk, waking up in the morning. And there's another thing like writing music when you've been doing it nonstop all year, 7 days a week. It's 3 in the morning. You're exhausted. You haven't slept, barely slept. You're sleeping at like 2 or 3 hours a night maybe, and then you have to come up with something good, hopefully. And your brain does a lot of tricks on you.
yeah.
And that's also a discipline in itself, like how to step away from music that you write. And sometimes especially when I was in my early 20s, I was you're very precious about your music, and you're very like, you focus on it because you spent 8 hours on it. Of course it's good, right? But that's not really the case. So so it's kind of, there's a lot of kind of discipline, I think, in terms of being able to step away from your music, write music, come from somewhere personal, but also be able to try to listen to it like an outsider and be like, no, that's really not really working, And, so I learned a lot of that with Harry from writing a lot of music and knowing to like, oh, no, this is terrible, and just trash it and start over again. Where I think when I was younger, it was more like, I spent a lot of time on it, so therefore it's good, and you're very precious about it. And if someone gives you a note about the music, you're like, how dare you? This is me. How dare you like write something bad or say something bad about the music? And that's just I think immaturity in the beginning of working in this business. But more and more as you go, I think you get more experience, and how to you're able to handle the notes and the changes and fixes, which usually have to happen very quickly, a lot better.
Toby, thank you very much for this insight here, and I would like to continue talking about your most recent projects, the short film which is scored for Disney Pixar, which is called Bao.
hmm
How did you get involved with the project?
I got I initially met with Tom McDougall, who's the vice president of music at Disney Pixar.
Hmm.
Met with him probably in 2000, I don't know, 15 or something like that. I had a meeting with him up at Disney, and and then I didn't hear from him for a while. I guess it was like over a year until I got a call, and he was asking if I wanted to come up to Pixar. And of course, I'm a huge Disney Pixar fan. I'm a bit obsessed. I've seen them all many times. I've seen all the shorts. I've seen all the films. I have a 3-year-old now, so I get to watch them all over again with him and experience them with him, which is awesome. And so I'm a huge fan. So of course, when I got that call, you want to come up to Pixar, I was like, oh my God, like felt like I won the lottery. I didn't know what the project was about or anything. So we flew up to Pixar for the day, and I got to meet, I felt kind of like I was at Disneyland for the first time. It was really exciting, and like walking down the road and heading towards the Steve Jobs building, and there's the huge Luxa lamp with the ball, and I was so excited. I was like so giddy, and I was like, oh my God, I gotta take I don't think I've ever taken a selfie before. I was like, I gotta take a selfie. And a picture of myself with the lamp, but I was trying to be like inconspicuous about it because I felt kind of embarrassed. People were walking on working, and so I went in, and then immediately I saw Tom, and he was talking to Pete Docter over there, who's one of the heads over there. I think he's like the head. He's been promoted just recently to one of the heads of Pixar, and also the director of Inside Out, and he's one of the brain trusts over there. And I recognized him immediately, and I got to meet him. And then I got to meet Domi, the director, and Becky, the producer, for the first time. And they showed me the short, and it was very early on. It was this is 2016, November, probably around then. They showed me the short for the first time, and it was in storyboard form. It was very early on. And after it finished, my first reaction was, oh my God, like what's going on here? Because there were so many parallels with the short and my life. Where it was almost creepy, because I almost thought like someone had done some research on my life or something. And after it stopped, Domi was like, so what do you think? And my first reaction was like, I'm the dumpling, like this is my life. And everybody was laughing about it, and there was just so many, I even married a blonde Caucasian. There was like every part of the short was mirrored my life, which was crazy. And never been in a situation where that's happened. Like sometimes you work on a film and you're like, okay, I can relate to these characters in these different ways, but never like in such a literal sense, where it was like, yes, that happened to me. And the title of the short is Bao, and my mom calls me Xiao Bao Bao, which means small. I'm a Chinese American, so grew up in immigrant family, so I'm very aware of the nuances with that. And I saw, as well as I think a lot of the audience did who saw it, you witness a reflection of your own identity and experiences. And it's crazy because I've never felt like I've seen any of that in a film like this on such a major scale, or like a Pixar short. And I fell in love with it instantly. I couldn't believe it. I felt so proud and honored to work on it. And Domi is also, she's also Chinese, born in Canada. Mm-hmm. Actually, she was born in China and moved to Canada. And she was so inspiring with her story, and she was so just absolutely, she just knew what she was doing, and it was brilliant in every way. And she was very clear on where she wanted to go. We talked about the emotional arc of the short and all that. And they were just wonderful, working with everyone, Tom, Becky, and Domi. They just all were so warm and welcoming, and I really couldn't have asked. I mean, I'm speechless when I think about the whole process, because I just felt, really, like, what am I doing here,
Right. So
Yeah.
you got involved at a very early stage. So did you
Yeah.
start collecting ideas based on the storyboards already?
Yes, once I well, the first thing, I didn't have the project when I first watched it. They showed it to me, and then they wanted me to go write something. So it was kind of like a demo.
Hmm.
And so I went back to, my studio in Los Angeles, and I I was just so familiar with the emotional story, and it meant so much to me. So I wrote something, and they really liked it. So I got hired to do the short, and that was very early on, which I think is a great thing because the music and the story kind of informed each other. There used to be a lot more. There used to be more sound effects.
Hmm.
There was a ending, and eventually, now it's just purely music. Um, so it kind of I remember getting that call from Domi and Becky. They're like, you know what? We're taking out the sound effects. It's just going to be music, Toby. So it's just you. And I was like, oh my, like no pressure. Um, so it was really nice, and they were lovely, and we I recorded with a lot of um, I got to record with all the major Chinese instruments. A good friend of mine is a professor at UCLA who specializes in Chinese traditional music, and she's an ethnomusicology professor over there. And so she has this room called the China room,
Hmm.
and it's full of like every single Chinese instrument you could possibly think of. And so I got to experiment and play with and study these instruments. And it was very important to me to be authentic with the Chinese element of the score, because it's a combination of East and West. So it was important that the East side of it was very authentic, and I wanted it to be, it's a universal story, but it also is like a Chinese immigrant story. So I really wanted to make sure that Chinese people would also appreciate what I was doing, um, and and it was good because I got to do a lot of research, but at the same time I grew up with listening to not on purpose, but it was just around the house all the time listening to Chinese opera and soap operas. So I got to hear a lot of that sound when I was growing up. So it was very familiar thing
Great.
working on it.
How did you figure out the instrumentation on the project?
It was a lot of experimenting, and I how I figured it out was it was a lot of kind of trying out different combinations. In the very early stages, Chi Li, she's the professor friend of mine who works there, the professor over there. She would bring over all these instruments to the studio, and she teaches a lot of students, so she brought her students over. So a lot of her students were demonstrating the instruments to me, and I got to hear them and kind of got to study them in terms of their range, what scales they play, because a lot of the Chinese traditional instruments play in a specific scale. A lot of times it's just this five-note pentatonic scale,
Hmm.
five-note scale that a lot of traditional Chinese music is in. So it was kind of a big challenge. Like, how do I incorporate? How do I tell this story? And I with just these specific scales. And I knew that I wanted to incorporate orchestra with these Chinese instruments. So that was like a big challenge, and that's something that took a while. And what I ended up doing was, I just kind of knew as I was writing, I knew, for example, okay, the erhu is going to be playing over here, and it's going to be doubling the winds over here, and I kind of just tried to figure it out. So I tried to make sure wherever I could that the players were hopefully in a key that they could play in. But also, there were some times where it was inevitable, like the Western side of things, the orchestra, would move to different keys here and there, to tell the story, and I would end up creating like some custom tunings for some of the instruments, so that they could play along with what the orchestra was doing. So it was kind of a lot of trying and experimenting, and we even I recorded a lot of Chinese instruments over the year and a half, And then at the end, I was at the final was at Warner Brothers, and I had a day with the orchestra and a day with the Chinese instruments, and we tried a lot of different things. Like for example, the Chinese bamboo flute, the dizi. We used all sorts of different assortments of those membrane flutes, and because they all have a different character and a different sound. But one thing is really nice, about Pixar, that I noticed is, they're such a stickler for quality,
Yeah.
and they give me time, and they let me really kind of, let me really hone it in. So it was very specific, even times where Domi would talk to me and she said, like I'd use like a different membrane flute for a specific section. She said, I liked the one that was in that last version that you did. Was that a different flute that you used? And I said, yeah, it was actually. And it was like a slightly larger flute. And she's like, I felt that one was a little bit softer and kind of explained a little bit more about what the dumpling was doing. And so I checked it out and I was like, oh my God, she's absolutely right. So it was like these kind of subtleties we got into, with really telling the story on every level, on every single instrument. And we had three different types of arhus, which all have their own specific kind of range and sound. And we were really, it wasn't like, okay, let's just grab an arhu and put it here. It was like, well, which one, and what's the character of this one, and did it make sense with the story? So it was really, really nice. The story itself has many, many layers of meaning, and the music does as well. And that was important to me too. Being a big Pixar Disney fan, I wanted to make sure that every, the music kind of spoke on many, many levels, and had multiple meanings of that related to the story.
Did you actually score the whole piece in different sections or in one go, one take?
Well, it's actually three pieces of music.
Yeah,
So we
so.
did,
Okay.
yeah, because there's some silence in between. I think the whole
Yeah.
short's like 8 minutes long, and there's maybe 7 minutes of music or a little more than that.
What's the basic story of the film, of the short film?
It's about a Chinese mom, an aging Chinese mom who's suffering from empty nest syndrome. So she's living there. She's by herself with her husband. She's with her husband, and her son has left. In that kind of depression that a parent gets when their kid leaves the home. And so she's kind of, then all of a sudden she's sitting there at the table, and one of her dumplings comes to life in mid-bite, and it's this giggly, cute little dumpling boy, and she gets to experience motherhood again, with this little dumpling, and but the dumpling starts growing up very quickly, and then the mom has to kind of deal with, kind of this bittersweet revelation that nothing stays cute and small forever. So it's kind of a very it has a lot of universal things that it's saying in terms of parenthood, the mom, the love for a child that you have as a parent, and also just that feeling of of a young boy growing up in an immigrant family, and then your desire for independence from that identity and that background. So like in the short, in the beginning, his mom takes him to the Chinese market, takes him to Tai Chi, and he's this cute little dumpling, and then eventually gets bigger and he starts rejecting going to Tai Chi, and he wants to go play soccer with the boys, and instead of having a nice delicious home cooked Chinese meal with his mom, he wants to go out and hang out with his friends and go for a drive, and you see like that kind of push and pull. And then of course one day he brings home a white fiance, and that's like, oh my God. So so I think like there's so many things it's speaking about, and I think a lot of people, I hope, and it seems like they are hopefully seeing some a reflection of themselves in this, and hopefully it's also it's very much about food also. Food is such a binding thing between you know, people getting together and having a conversation. And I think that's very relevant as well for like today's, you know, charged environment politically.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of, just like everyone, instead of everyone kind of like yelling at each other and getting angry and everything's so heated and everybody's so divided, you know, just like a reminder that, that we're all not that different. And if we all sit down together, you know, having a meal together kind of really joins people together. So I think it's just a beautiful, beautiful short, and it has a beautiful message. And on top of all that, you know, again, it speaks about, you know, a Chinese family, which I think is really underrepresented in you know, in the mainstream culture, in films, everything. So I'm really happy that this seems like a step in that direction, and so it's wonderful to be able to, you know, have a chance to work on this, especially my background as well. So it kind of awoke a lot of things within myself too, and made me reflect on my childhood too. So it was really great.
Great. Hopefully people will, you know, look at it as a learning experience or as something educational, and let's hope people can think outside the box and fully embrace, you know, the whole story behind it.
Absolutely.
Have you actually spoken to some audience members who saw the film and to kind of, you know, get their reaction?
I've you know, mostly everyone I've spoken to has been really positive. Maybe they're being that way as well because they're talking to me and they know but they're, you know, everyone's been very, very sweet. You know, I've spoken to a lot of people who've said like, oh my God, like it made me cry, and it was like I was like, that's my mom, and it made me like think about my mom. And you know, and there's always that kind of you know, like, you know, life goes on and everyone gets busy, and it's like, you know, call your mom, you know, go take her out to a meal. And I think, you know, I have a 3-year-old, and I, you know, after I had a child, it like opened up so many things in my thinking about, you know, my parents, and wow, like what did they have to go through? I mean, every parent is like a, you know, a hero. I mean, it is difficult. It just takes so much, you know, infinite patience and love and focus to raise a child, and it's such a beautiful thing, and I hope that this opens that up. I mean, I've heard a little things here and there. I read a few things of people saying that they were confused about some of the short, and for me, my reaction to that is like, that's good, because, you know, then it should ask questions. You know, I think it should open up. You should ask questions about it, like, why do I not understand it? Especially if you're not, you know, you're not of Asian descent, or if you're not an immigrant. You know, it's, you know, I mean, I guess we're all immigrants really these days, but you know, people being raised in a specific way, you know, they, you know, I hope it opens up questions about culture, and if you don't, you know, if you know, it's understandable someone would be confused if they see something they're not used to seeing. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, I was talking to my assistant here who works here, Bryce, and he was telling me, you know, we were talking a little bit about it, and he's like, you know, it's really interesting because he's like, you know, I'm like a white guy from Orange County, and I always grew up, and every superhero was like a white guy, you know, like, and I just always saw that, you know, Superman and everybody, Batman, and like, my whole life I've always been like, okay, you know, like you kind of have this automatic, you know, belonging, you know, you see your identity on the big screen, you see it everywhere. And then, you know, I didn't really think about it till much later, but you know, when I was growing up, you know, being Chinese and having both my parents grew up in China, were born in China, and I was first generation American, like, you know, you constantly had the desire of like, I want to be like my friends, you know, and, you know, never really seeing that. And, you know, when I was a little kid growing up in school, kids were like, oh, do you know karate? Because I was Chinese, you know, because that's what they saw. Like every time they watched a movie with somebody who was Asian, they'd be automatically would think you must be like Bruce Lee, right? You must know karate, right? And so it's a really like interesting thing, and I think it's very, very important for, you know, people have a responsibility as filmmakers and people who are, you know, what they're putting out there. And I think it's important to, the more diverse we become, the more our stories become diverse, and not just with, actors, but, writers and cinematographers and music and composers, everybody, it's going to expand the horizons of the music and the stories.
Yeah.
And when I hear people say, "Oh, there's only like 5 stories that get recycled all the time," I'm like, there are so many more stories than that, and we just need to kind of be more open. And I feel like we're starting to head in that direction. And I get really excited whenever I see like when you see a film, or even when I hear of like a composer that's from somewhere else, than where I'm used to, like composers, like a Spanish composer, or I don't know really of many Chinese composers. So it's, whenever I see any of that, I get really excited, because I'm like, yes, we're doing it, guys. We're heading in that direction.
Did you actually have to rewrite the piece multiple times?
It wasn't really, I didn't have to really rewrite it. It was more kind of like honing it in, it was interesting. It wasn't like a situation where it's like, oh my God, that's completely wrong. Let's start over. I think from the very get-go, we were all kind of very in tune. When Domi told me her story and her upbringing, my reaction wasn't like necessarily like, oh, that's interesting. My response was, yes, that's also my favorite food, and that's also what my mom did, and that's exactly my experience when I was in school. Like I had, I really related to her, like literally, and it was so inspiring, everything she was saying, and I was so excited that, oh my God, you're telling this story. This is a story that so needs to be told, and it's incredible too that Pixar, greenlit this project and was like, yeah, let's do this, and giving away a spoiler, obviously, when the mom actually eats the dumpling, like that's such a bold thing to do, and that's something that Pete Docter actually told Domi to stick with. She wrote, she was writing the story, and she eventually, she took out that part of the story, and when she pitched it, Pete Docter said, wait, this is not what you pitched to me. Like, pitch the other version, the one that you pitched to me. So he was always kind of championing her to stay true to her weirdness, and to her gut. And Domi was the same with me. She was absolutely so supportive and like, yes, like go there and go where you feel, and if you feel it, go there, and like, and be honest, don't be afraid to go do that. And so I had, I think that's a great recipe of, when I think back on a lot of great film scores, of course the Williams and Spielberg collaboration, right?
Yeah.
Or even the Christopher Nolan, Hans Zimmer collaboration. Time I've read about stuff, it always felt like there was this trust between the filmmakers, and this trust to work together, but at the same time to not make you, give you a feeling of like, go ahead and do it. You're in a safe place, and go be creative. And, I think these days, a lot of times when you're working on a project, the timelines are so short, and understandably that happens. And, emotions get high, things can become very intense. And, as a composer, you have to be able to handle those situations, of course. But so once in a while, there's these films that I see that had this collaboration that goes on for a long, long time, and these films really stick the test of time, and the Williams Spielberg collaboration, for example, on E.T., when he was doing the flying scene, and Williams was working and conducting and trying to get it to work, it's this long, like 10-minute cue, and Spielberg said, look, don't worry about the picture, just play the piece, just conduct the piece, and I'll cut the picture to the music.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the greatest cinematic moments and musical moments I've ever seen.
Totally.
Because it just completely feels natural. Like the music, no matter what, wants to flow naturally in a specific way. And a lot of times I think because of timeline, because of, all sorts of reasons, the music has to be like Frankensteined and shifted and molded and rewritten and twisted and work and appease everybody, all these different people who all have their own version of the movie going on in their minds, and I've been on films that have worked out very well, and I've also worked on films that haven't worked out well, and I see, and of course working on 50 plus films with Harry too, you see all these different kind of things happening, and eventually you start seeing like what's kind of works, what always seems to work, what always kind of starts having issues. And a lot of times the issues come from everybody's trying to make a different movie, and in Bao, everybody was making the same movie. Everybody had like this love and acceptance for what they were doing, and they felt proud, and they completely trusted me, and that kind of gave me this different feeling that I'm not used to when I would write music. Actually, it reminded me of when I was writing music as a kid, where nobody was judging me. I was by myself, and I could write what I wanted, and I'd played for my parents. I wasn't scared what my parents were going to say to me about the music. I wasn't going to be afraid I was going to be fired, or they're going to be like, oh God, we better go call this other composer,
Yeah.
Like I felt very safe and very, and for that, I think that gave like an extra percentage to make the music even better. And so I think there's that whole attitude at Pixar, this kind of family. On top of that, I had so much to do with the film personally, and they so much trust, and they would make these big decisions on the story and the picture based on the music too. And usually it's usually the other way around. So there was this trust, and so there was like an extra percentage of me having a personal relationship with the short, and also this other percentage of me having this complete trust and being able to do this. And I think it shows in the music. And I'm very, very proud of what everybody did, including the music, on the short. And after that one experience I had with Pixar, it just to me, I'm like, okay, this is why. This is one of the reasons why their movies are so fantastic.
Yeah.
And the detail that we went in with the music, and the detail they go in with creating their stories. And, they'll work on the story over and over and over again. They even say, stories aren't written, they're rewritten. And they'll just tear up the story and start over again. They'll work for years on something and then reset.
Great.
And that kind of dedication to artistry is I think is one of the reasons why their films are so successful.
Absolutely. It's great to have that level of support and trust, and to enable somebody to go the extra mile. And as you said, nobody is perfect, and I don't think you can expect anybody or any composer to just whip something off. You can't expect somebody to write a complete masterpiece within a couple of days. You have to evolve somehow. And
Right.
I think if any composer, feels like they might get fired just because, some executive or some producer didn't like the first sketch of the cue, it's the wrong way to go. You're making people feel insecure about themselves, and yeah, at least
It's a common thing, but it's and that happens often. And this is one of the great things about film composers out here. I have admiration for so many composers out here because of things they have to deal with, and they still strive and they still succeed through all these things they have to deal with, and still write a good score.
Yep.
And that's something that we have to do more often than not. What I'm talking about with Pixar is like the 1%. It's and a lot of times, sometimes too, looking on the other flip side of the coin, sometimes things can be really intense and great things can happen as well.
Sure.
So it really depends on the what's happening in the film, the characters that are working together, whether you have a great relationship and connection with the story and with the director. It's so many things, and it really is amazing because there's one thing studying music and composing music, but then composing music for film and television is such a different thing, and it's really interesting when whenever I've spoken to students who are coming up in here, and they're coming from the music side of things, and obviously, and they haven't had that experience yet to work with lots and lots of filmmakers and work on films, and that's a complete other side of it's like the other 50% of it.
Yeah.
And there's so much there, and there's so much in terms of being able to figure out what other people want. They're not musicians. They can't explain. I mean, many of them cannot explain to you in musical terms what they want. So a lot of it has to do with being able to translate and feel what the film needs and what the director is feeling. What the producers are feeling, what they want. So a lot of translation, a real like kind of understanding people and understanding.
Yeah.
And there's so much. It's so much. It's very, very deep, and I think it's really impossible to just teach that. You really just have to work with a lot of different types of people.
Yeah.
And that is a huge part of film composition and television composition is being able to come in there and your specialty as a composer and being able to listen. Really listen to what everyone's saying and what they're not saying. And hopefully come up with some ideas that will help them tell the story.
Yeah, it's a big factor, being able to communicate, translate, read between the lines, and hopefully deliver something.
Yeah.
That's convinces the filmmakers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting. Terrifying at the same time. But I feel very fortunate to, to be a working composer. To be able to do music for a living is really, is something that I constantly remind myself that I'm, don't want to take for granted.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
So always, remembering where you're from and remember the struggle and how hard you work to get to where you are and putting that into everything you do. And I think is very, very important, treating every piece of music you write like, okay, this has to be the best thing I've done, and trying to aim at that at everything you do, I think is really important. Not to lose sight of what you're doing, because when you're really busy and you're working on even maybe more than one project at the time, you always have to give every project your 100%, because not just because mainly because every story is just as important, and keeping focus and staying fresh is also a discipline. Taking care of yourself, be healthy, go exercise, talk to your family, that's really important.
Couldn't agree more. Tell me what's next for you. Can you disclose what you're working on right now?
I just finished a film for Braun Animation. They're up in Vancouver. And I just finished a feature animation with them. We just finished scoring. And I'm working on a few other things, but I'm not allowed to talk about those yet.
Sure.
You sign over your life and your newborn to not talk about those things. But I'm really excited about getting into it.
Okay, Toby, thank you so much for taking so much time out of your schedule. I know you have to leave right now. We've spoken for more than 60 minutes. Thank you very much for your time. It was a real pleasure talking to you, and I hope we get to talk soon in the future.
Yes, likewise. Thank you, Michael, for asking me to do this.
Thank you, and you have a nice day. Bye-bye.
You too. Take care. Bye.